welcome everyone this afternoon. Stay fresh, please. Drink water.
Too late.
So you're going to hear a lot in the next couple of days about AI. I think I've just come from a couple of conversations on this very topic. But as AI becomes increasingly embedded in our daily lives, from healthcare diagnostics and hiring tools and regulation, algorithms and creative ideation and production, I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves who's building out this technology and whose perspectives are being reflected in this tech. Because we know that the gender AI gap is significant. According to the World Economic Forum, women make up just 22% of AI professionals globally. And I think that can have some really big consequences on the platforms that we develop, the decisions that we make, and the output that we create. So as Sharon mentioned, I'm joined by an amazing panel this afternoon, and we're going to really double click into what each of these ladies are seeing in the industry. What can we do tangibly to make a much more positive impact at scale across some of these solutions that we're building out, and also what you guys can take away from really trying to effectuate your own change in this space. So I'm going to let each of our amazing women introduce themselves, and then we will get straight into the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. My name's Jacqueline Gernier. I'm an Executive Vice President at GWI. For those of you perhaps who are not familiar with GWI, we're a consumer insights platform. So we've been collecting data for the last 15 years, really representing the attitudes, the behaviours, the preferences of 3 billion online users. I'm very happy to say that this year we launched our own AI assistant, which is helping insights teams, but also marketeers and strategists in organisations to better understand their audiences and to make really highly personalised, tailored decisions on the back of that data. We take our responsibilities as a technology company developing AI solutions really seriously, so very happy to be exploring these themes with you today.
Thank you, Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Woods. I'm the CMO of Teradata. Teradata is, we call ourselves the trusted AI company, really focused on data analytics and AI before it was actually popular and before it was in vogue. My career really spans technology for the last 25 years, like at companies Oracle, Nielsen, and IBM and GE. And so I do think this is a tremendously important topic. Not just because of the biases that are in data, period. There are inherent biases that we all need to be keenly aware of and really understand what we can benefit from AI, not just for AI's sake.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Smith. I'm an equity partner at Deloitte Digital UK. I sit in our Deloitte Digital practice, which is essentially our internal creative agency, leading on all things emerging technology. So was the pioneer of us introducing spatial computing, Web3, i.e. the metaverse, and also part of us launching our Gen AI practice. We've always had an AI institute, but obviously there was a demand from the market where there was a big shift around Gen AI. So was a part of deploying that across EMEA, which is my footprint. I too have been in technology for the balance of my career. So worked for BASF, have been at Duke Energy and Power Utilities, also International Paper, and my last, obviously, 7 years have been with Deloitte Digital, also ensuring that we deploy this with inclusion in mind as our people and purpose lead across our consulting business. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
I'm Paige Bilins. Thank you for having me as well. I'm the SVP for our product team at Magnite, which is a sell-side technology company that powers the vast majority of monetization on streaming apps and television services is kind of my world. I was a former software engineer, so just generally very passionate about bringing women into technology in general, and I think AI is going to be a really important space to make sure that that happens, that we don't kind of repeat some of the mistakes of the past, and we start off in a good place so that we are developing all of these algorithms that can actually produce appropriate information.
Thank you so much, and what a stellar lineup, right? So welcome everyone to this conversation. I thought that was an interesting point that you just made there, Paige, which is actually technology as a career, as an industry, hasn't been particularly inclusive. So I want to kick off this conversation, Jackie, I'm going to come to you first, around what are the consequences now and what is different about having inequality in this particular industry, in AI? Is there a difference, and what are some of those real world consequences?
Absolutely. Well, I think the consequences are huge. I mean, we know, just as a headline, that diverse teams are high-performing teams and make much better design decisions. Inclusivity actually is, good for business and good for the ultimate outcomes. I think one of the areas that we're particularly concerned about in terms of sort of not having diverse, inclusive decision-making in the design of AI models is really the training data that those models are being trained on. We know, for example, that some of the training sets that are being used are coming from, social media platforms. And when we look at those social media platforms and we look at the GWI data that we have on their use and consumption, you can see that they're very heavily, in some cases, skewed between one gender or another, or particular age groups. And so the fact that these tend to be, first, second, third place data sets that are being used to train the models that most of us are using or building on is obviously, a real huge concern. And I think it really matters to consumers as well. We very carefully have been tracking consumer sentiment around the use of AI tools. And 30% of consumers and adopters of AI say actually it's the accuracy and the relevancy of the data that is their number one concern. And that's very closely followed by concerns around bias and prejudice within that data. So huge, sort of consequences if you don't ensure that the data is balanced and diverse.
Yeah. And Jacqueline, you spoke about being in this industry for a while now, and you touched on trust, actually. Do you think it affects trust in a way that changes people's behaviour? I'd love for you to kind of build on Jacqueline's point.
I do. First of all, I think trust is paramount anytime you think about data and AI, because if you can't trust the data and you can't trust the information that you're getting, everything fundamentally starts with trust. Even your own relationships with people that you just work with every day, it starts there. And so I do think, based on what my twin Jacqueline just said, is that the information that people are using to start with has to be what we like to talk about, kind of golden data or golden records, or records or information that you actually know where it's coming from, you know where it's being sourced. I would argue that we should all be really concerned, because even when you think about the medical industry and the medical field and how drugs are made, going back, just start there before we even had AI, about not testing women, not testing different ethnic groups, not doing those things so that the drugs that are coming out may not be as effective depending on what your kind of background is and all those things. And I think that AI has the same kind of risk. Because if you're only kind of, pulling from a certain pool, pulling from a certain gender, AI is 100% based on patterns. It's all about machine learning that's been around for a very long time. And if you're not careful in how that information is being curated, that's how you end up with the biases that we have. And it will be critical, not just for women, but women and all different groups, specifically ethnic groups, to be engaged in these conversations so that they can identify the bias, because what may seem like not a bias to someone, as soon as I see it, I'm gonna be like, oh, wait a second, that's kind of, right? And I think that's the only way you get that, is to have a diverse group of people looking at the information.
So Lisa, just building on that point that Jacqueline was talking about, like, what are you seeing on the flip side to that in the work that you're building out and delivering for clients? Like, how are you seeing some of those consequences, or what are you doing to help mitigate that across your teams?
I think particularly around, we have a lot of alliances, very corporate thing to do. But we have particular alliances with Apple, also with Meta. And when Apple launched the health app back in 2014, it excluded data around women being able to track their menstrual cycle, which is really important if you're looking at fitness and how your body is responding to that. So I think the fact that we had this responsible technology team that was sort of a bolt-on to our solution, architects and our product engineers to be able to intentionally look for some of that exclusion, and then to be able to work with Apple in a way that maybe a lot of organizations didn't get a chance to. It's almost like leveraging the privilege of working in a big brand. That sort of helped us inform a different product. I think also in Siri, I'm just trying to use a real example. That was another thing. If you look at Siri, and I don't know if there's been a lot of advancements now, but sort of the voice tone of women, it's quite submissive. And to be able to look at data and to be able to not be defensive and really to sort of respond to that, no different than it is, from a racial sort of bias, was really big. And now we have a partnership with Heathrow around London Heathrow Airport around the biometric rejects that are happening. The large amount of people that go and swipe their passports that have to go are people of color. Or women, because the males that are really developing this technology haven't really sort of factored in sort of that gender recognition. Same thing happened with Serena and Oprah. There was this big thing that went viral. So that is a very sort of tangible and specific way that our teams have been partnering, where we have alliances with big corporates that have big responsibility, owning big data sets, big data centers, and deploying the products into the market. How might we get them to sort of pause and either, if they don't have it, augment those teams to be able to consider where biases might be in algorithms or just part of the overall product design.
Super interesting, and we already know that AI and facial recognition, as you were calling out, from, I think I've got a stat here, research from MIT and Stanford has shown that facial recognition systems are up to 34% less accurate for darker skinned women than for lighter skinned men.
Exactly.
That is unbelievable. Paige, I could see you being triggered by something that Lisa said, and you were like desperately trying to say something. So
no, it just drives me crazy that every AI assistant, the default is a woman.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Let me pick a sexy male voice. That's one of the big ones for me. And I think that most women feel that way as well.
So, Lisa, you touched on it in trying to catch these cases. I'm not even going to call them edge cases, but catch these cases where actually, because women haven't been involved in the development of this software, actually you're getting a completely biased output and experience off the back of that. I'd love to kind of open it up to the floor in terms of what are some of those other examples that we can lean into, which Lisa started off with some really quite stark examples of where this bias is being caught. Paige, I'm going to start with you actually. What are some of the things that you've noticed, those consequences, those cases where you can absolutely see that there hasn't been a diverse team behind some of these solutions?
I mean, you mentioned hiring. That's a really scary one. Yeah. We have come so far, especially in kind of the tech and engineering organizations, to be really intentional about making sure that we're trying to pull in women, people of color, things that are just generally unrepresented or underrepresented in technology fields. And sometimes when you use these AI tools to go scan resumes, you get a very homogenous set of candidates back. And I think that in particular, the worst thing we can do is start leveraging some of these tools and actually reverse a lot of the work that we've put in over the last couple of decades into bringing women into the fold or bringing different, people that are in our society but are just vastly underrepresented in technology. And I think that one is one of the bigger, scarier ones to me. I think, we use the word intention, and I think it's a lot of intention around that. You can use the tools, but you have to look at it with a lens of, okay, but I have, all of these things that I need to get done. Is this tool actually getting that done for me, or is it actually not there yet? And designing with that in mind too.
I think the assumption that AI is the panacea that's going to solve all the woes that we have. I think that's part of the problem. I think there is a real belief that, like, all of a sudden my problems are solved, my world is here, especially on the issue of equality, of assuming that it's going to make it more equal, when I actually believe that it's going to make it less equal, and that we will have less equity. And I think that, you know, humans have to still be at the center of what's happening with AI. It is artificial intelligence. It doesn't mean it's intelligent. And we still have empathy. We're the ones that have to use our sensibility to ensure that we are understanding that these things come to us with bias, and how do we ensure that we mitigate that. And to your point, I am extraordinarily concerned about just the climate in general and going backwards, and everything that's kind of said, even the vitriol, that's all, it all morphs and then becomes part of what is the data set for AI. The data set for AI is the zeitgeist that's out there. So I do think that we have to be really, really careful.
I think we have to be careful, but I'm going to be really contentious, right? Because a lot of AI solutions exist to make our lives easier. So if we're expecting people to kind of like double click and dig into the answers that are being presented, like that is not going to be a solve. And we can't have a Lisa or a Paige like just being the person to go, oh, hold on a minute, let's add a different lens to this. Let's add a human lens to the output of whatever tool or solution that we're leaning into, right? So I
think you have to, I mean, there's the role of the data scientist becomes important. I do, even when I get things that come to me, whether it's ChatGPT or not, you see what the sources are. So it is your responsibility to check those sources. It is your responsibility to understand where is this data coming from that I'm getting, so that I can make the determination whether I trust it or not. Humans have to be part of this. It can't be like I'm just allowing systems to do it, because by default, and as you mentioned, by default, they are built by us, so there will be bias in it, and we have to be the ones that have to be accountable. And I always say that, like, a favorite saying of mine is, you know, there's no such thing as responsible AI. People are who is responsible. That is an adjective for what people are, not for what technology is. And you may, if you have responsible people, you might be able to have, I think, a real strong foundation of building trust. And once you do that, you can do it. But, you know, I think you have to kind of start really there.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's fair. Jackie, I'm going to come to you. I like to be a little bit contentious, right? Because also I know people are lazy, and I can't imagine that people are going to look at sources of where their data is coming from when they use some of these AI platforms. But I think, Jackie, you spoke to this at the beginning, which is, you know, there's the way that you guys are doing it at GWI in terms of like the scale of systemic transformation in this space. Can you talk a little bit more to that? Because I'm really interested in how we solve for this challenge at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two sides to this. We're certainly working with a number of organisations that are developing either, you know, B2B or B2C facing AI solutions, and they are taking the reliability and the accuracy and the kind of the diverse nature of the data very, very seriously. I think part of that is because they're building responsibly, but also part of that, I think, is because consumers are increasingly demanding that. And I think as consumers become more au fait in AI, I think that will continue. So I think a lot of the safeguards that we'll see, yes, hopefully there'll be, you know, regulation where appropriate, but I think it will also be very much consumer-led. And I think you only have to think about, you know, there is a tiny number of people, like a really concerning small number of people that are responsible for defining the data that the AI models are trained on. You know, when I was reading the other day, you know, it was talking about there's 6,000 languages globally, and yet most of the data that the models are trained on are obviously their sources that are in English. So that immediately sends off, you know, a warning signal that you're not going to be building balanced, you know, diverse views if you're using an AI model that doesn't have that human data also incorporated into it. And then you combine with that, there's 25 million marketeers currently using ChatGPT to make business decisions. Another big warning sign. So we're certainly talking to a lot of companies where they're taking our human data and actually building that in so it's so much more representative. So I think there are ways that you can build solutions in a very responsible way and make sure that the models are being trained on a wide range of diverse data. And we know that the larger the data set, the more accurate it will be. The greater the variance, the more standard, your mean is going to be. So it makes sense for the effectiveness and reliability of the outputs as well.
I really love that because it talks to like how you can change these frameworks, these systems at scale. Paige, what does that look like for you in your role, kind of the space of inclusive product development in AI?
I mean, it really starts with building the team with those diverse perspectives and kind of laying that foundation. And that gives you some sense of safety, right? If you've got a team that is coming at it with diverse perspectives, then you're going to have a better outcome in general, but you can't stop there. I think there has to be a lot of scaffolding put up around particularly the process of building product, as well as, how do we make sure, like, what are we doing? And when we're evaluating people's designs, how are we thinking about diversity in our design? And then all the way through to testing, right? And I think AI is a really different use case for testing as well, because when we go and test a product, it's like, okay, great, it works. And then we build some automation around that. And as long as anything else we build later doesn't break the automation testing, like it's pretty good to go. We don't think about going back and kind of retesting the whole thing. But you can't do that with AI because your data model, your underlying data model is constantly changing. And so how do you have to put in the scaffolding as well to constantly go back and touch those things again? And that's a different kind of testing and QA model for developers. I think that's going to be something that's really important to figure out. What is that cadence? How do you do that? How do you do that from diverse perspectives? Like, how do you make sure that your testers, if they are 95% male, how do you tell them to change the prompt and see what happens? And so I think those are going to be some big questions we have to figure out over the next few years.
I think that's super interesting. It's not just the input, not just the output, but actually the testing. I hadn't even looked at it through that lens. Lisa, question for you, because you've been obviously leading some of the solutions in this space. How have you approached this whole space of testing?
A little bit of what Paige was just mentioning, and I think a lot of just prayer.
I love the honesty of that.
I mean, I was speaking at CogX, and everyone sort of descended into London, and there was this whole notion about people telling you that it's all figured out. Right. And I think the best thing you can do is be honest, so that people are courageous enough to interrogate the data and to know that maybe they are deploying something that's imperfect, but end user refined. And for us, I was just thinking about, I was looking at some of my colleagues and teammates out in the audience. We did this project with the Stratford Paddle Club, and it was one of the ways we wanted to introduce Gen AI to marginalized communities across the UK. And we had a brilliant team that thought about, okay, well, paddle is quite a privileged sport. However, there's something about being a bit intimidated if you have a coach and you don't know how to play, or what people call pickle. And so our teams developed a Gen AI coach to be able to help various people, including myself, learn the game of paddle. And it was extremely biased. I mean, we have inclusive designers that was part of it. We had people on site sort of taking surveys and data about the outcome of what's had. And I think designing with the community integrated has been a way we've approached it, because we can kind of get into our corporate boxes and get into our incubators and our labs and have all the coolest ideas. And we think that maybe by surveying or going out and bringing in data that's going to really inform a product. But I think the approach we've taken is to be brave enough to just get it out there and say, look, this is going to be really messed up. I mean, we had people that were getting scanned and they were showing up even as animals as it relates. But this is happening out, that whole thing that went viral on Instagram where it had the little thing that looked like a Barbie doll and it had your, I don't know if you looked at some people, but the people that are my followers were talking about how it returned things that they didn't look like and what their kids didn't look like. And we had to be brave enough to say, we think there's a really good idea about us sort of introducing this Gen AI coach. We are terrified at the data that we're getting, but if you could create some grace and help us collect around this, because we don't have time to go and cleanse every data set that's coming in.
Yeah.
But to your point, Debbie, like, does this stop you from adopting the tool? It's here.
Yeah.
So there's something about getting out the starting blocks, and then there's something about putting sort of this clean room around it to say, we're not going to let these sort of false narratives contaminate people really adopting it.
Yeah.
We also need to protect people who may have adverse experiences with it, which doesn't drive trust. If you have people being rejected, like women or people of color, they're never going to want to engage it, because how awful does it feel to have a scan and it come back with you looking like something that that's not in your likeness. So I think for us, it's been more about, look, it's here. We have really smart people that are positioned in very technical roles. I think our cross-functional teams look different than they have before. We have people in our ethics team, we have people from the community that are a part of it. We have a different cross-functional team that is part of bringing a product to market so that it is truly inclusive by design versus sort of, a cliche that we're designing with everyone in mind. The fact of the matter is you can't.
Yeah.
So, I'd much rather be honest and say this is where we started and this is where we're continuing to go and make that transparent.
Yeah. What a stark just call out to the consequences of putting some of this tech in people's hands, but actually also to Jacqueline's point, you're putting this into people's hands to then be able to feed back and course correct. Exactly.
And I think that's also how you build trust.
Yeah.
Right.
100.
So they started off with, hey, this may not be perfect. We know there are going to be some challenges. Give us an opportunity to make the corrections that need to be made.
Yeah.
And you can be part of that change. And I think there's something really empowering about that, that I think most people would admire and lean into.
Yeah. Okay, I can't believe that we're almost at time already. I could literally talk to you ladies like all afternoon.
The breeze is just coming.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. But Jacqueline, you nicely bridged where I want to close, which is be part of the change. What is it that everyone can do, women in particular, to be, especially as someone who's led in this space for so long, what is the one piece of advice you'd give to women or to brands to make that change more tangibly?
The one piece of advice is something that Lisa said as well, is you need to lean in. It's here. It's something that I don't think that we can be afraid of. The genie is already out of the bottle, but we have a responsibility to create and make the world that we want to live in. And I think that world is better when all genders and all ethnicities are represented.
Thank you. Paige, last thoughts?
I would just say this is a huge opportunity to make a big impact. There's a lot of things you can do that make smaller impacts along the way, but this could be a really, really big one. So get involved.
Jackie?
Couldn't agree more. That was exactly kind of the insight that I was going to close with. I think we have a huge responsibility as female leaders working in creative, in technology. I agree with you, obviously.
Yes.
Jackie.
Yes.
This was on purpose, right, guys?
Yeah. We absolutely need to lean in, and I do think that it starts with ensuring that we're building diverse teams to make sure that we do have inclusive design and people are asking the right questions and calling out things when they're not being done properly. So, yeah.
And Lisa?
I'd say two things, if that's okay.
Of course.
One is around the pipeline, the recruiting aspect of it. If you're in positions where you can kind of short circuit or accelerate that, that's something we've done, where we've built sort of academies, not made kids feel like they had to go to school for 4 years, just like give them some sharp, quick training, because I think it's sort of a crisis. It's more of an emergency state that we are continuing to deploy these technologies, and we know we have this digital divide in our society. And then the second thing is to really be practical, that it is a tool. Even if it's a tool that people believe will replace humans in general. I mean, there'll be all types of sort of theories around it, but I think if you really just pragmatically think of it as a tool and you sort of learn how that tool can serve you, there'll be a lot more learning. Lots of people have lots of opinions, but I don't think people are reading or educating themselves. They're just like scanning the newspaper and then just like jumping on the propaganda. It's scary, it's gonna take you. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you haven't read anything about this. So I would just say, think of it as a tool, the way you would use any other tool to help you with any other thing in your life.
And what a way to end. Thank you so much to this amazing panel. I'm super humble, thank you. And I think we've got 5 minutes for questions. So does anyone have a burning question that they would like to ask the panel? I should have given you a warning when we started, so you start thinking about it. Anything at all, don't worry if not.
What are some of the positive outcomes that you have seen with AI once you have approached it from a more inclusive angle?
Great question.
I can take one. I was sharing this with Debbie and our team on one of our prep calls. So last year, we had the opportunity to partner with the International Olympic Committee, particularly the British Paralympic Association, as part of Paris 2024. And they wanted to increase ticket sales. So it was a marketing sort of deployment for them. They wanted to increase ticket sales for Paralympian Games as much as they had for abled athletes. And so we had a chance to create a metaverse experience for them called Mindscape. You can do a lot of reading about it on the internet. And Mindscape was more about how athletes prepare for the sport, but Paralympians have a completely different take on that. So we were able to use AI to help with some of the athletes that had speech impediments. And it really, we were certified, we worked with a partner, Scope, that was sort of like our credentialing, sort of accessibility partner in that. But the athletes were in tears. We had a chance to be a part of some of those interviews. And they were so excited that a technology allowed them to tell a story where they had sort of physically struggled to get words out. And I thought it was a beautiful story of this sort of ethical way of deploying a technology, obviously permission from an athlete, but I just got chill bumps, like this liberating thing that said, every day I want to be able to tell a story, but I physically am not able to do so. So to be able to use a technology to clearly hear a voice and to tell a story around that will probably be one of my favorite use cases for a very, very long time.
Any other questions from the audience?
Actually, this morning we've been down on quite a few things. It's been brought up a lot, and we have a company called Trust Your Creative. But what does trust actually mean to you guys, or the truth?
I think it comes back to having transparency in terms of the data that I think the models are being built on, the outputs. So I think that's hugely important. And I think, really taking seriously the responsibility that you have as the solution provider. So that's certainly what it means to me. We also take a very responsible approach in terms of how we're using AI internally. So our GC actually heads up the AI Centre of Excellence internally, which is really important to us. We see him as the grown-up in the room, and he will keep us honest. And then we're also using our Chief People Officer. It's been proven that people are more likely to engage with AI projects in organisations when they're led by the Chief People Officer versus the CEO. Oh, wow. So I think it's smart in that respect, but it's not lost on us that also, Chelsea Coates, our CPO, is responsible for our DEI initiatives as well. So she really does bring that lens to it. So I think it's, externally, what you're building for your customers, but also internally, how you're, adopting AI projects and AI technology for your employees.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer it, but that was my question.
I just want to say one thing on that. I want to double down on transparency because it's obviously critical. And I like to use this analogy of data and AI and analytics really being like water. So you have this assumption that, there's this planet I think is made up of 70% water. But when you kind of really get down to what's usable, what can I ingest, what can I actually use, it ends up being like 0.3%. Because even the thing that's pure may be in a glacier and it's not accessible. So when you really think about that, you just have to think about there is a lot of information out there And there will be a lot of information that will be really, really good to make decisions on, because there's way more information than we could ever use anyway. And just really think about it that way, because I do think that's a positive way to think about it. And as long as you have clean, pristine information, you'll get good information out and understand why you're doing it and understand what the value is. And so AI for AI's sake may not be the thing, but I think there are so many really great use cases, whether it's medical, financial services, just many things that are out there that we can truly benefit from, just making sure that we're doing it in a responsible way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. We're going to close there because I know I'm going to get in trouble, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.